Hey everybody, welcome back to our study in Romans. Just excited to continue, and I just want to encourage you to follow along with this because this is just going to be an exciting journey, chapter by chapter, through the book. Last week we talked about in the beginning of Romans the doctrine of the resurrection, Christ's deity, Christ's humanity, and we ended up with the theme of the book moving forward in verses 16 and 17 being the doctrine of faith. That we are counted righteousness by our faith, not because of anything we do. And today we're going to be moving into 18 through 32, which is going to get into God's wrath on the unrighteous. So we want to look at this and just keep in mind that this part of this lesson, part of the lesson, is coming to from the perspective of the law. Paul's writing this from the perspective of the law. So keep that in mind. And some of the questions we proposed for the group was, what reasons does Paul give for the wrath of God against humanity? Why is man without excuse? And in what ways does God reveal his wrath? So with that being said, I would just encourage you to pause the video, read starting in verse 18, go to the end of chapter 1, which is verse 32, and then we'll see what we can take away from God's word today. And, so pause the video, and if you pause the video, welcome back. So we're going to start out, and the first question was, what reasons does Paul give for the wrath of God against humanity? And we see this right off the bat in the first couple verses. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. So those who suppress the truth is how God reveals his wrath against all humanity. There's different types of wrath. There's eschatology, end of times wrath. There's consequential wrath. Cataclysmic wrath, which is like the wrath of the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah. There's the wrath of abandonment. And the wrath of abandonment is the wrath that we're going to be talking about, that Paul's talking about here in this section. Why is man without excuse? We just read some of that in verses 19 and 20. Because what may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. That's pretty amazing right there. So you can go back and read Psalms 19, 1 through 6, and that will say the same thing about how we are without excuse, talking about God's creation and the boundaries. Just an awesome read there. So this is a general knowledge that's being talked about here. This isn't a knowledge of salvation, but this is a general knowledge. There's a general knowledge and a special revelation. The Jews had a special revelation because God gave them their laws and put it in their heart. They heard him speak up on the mountain. Paul's conversion, he hears God's voices. He revealed to him. He set him apart as an apostle. These are special revelations. But Paul is saying here, even the Gentiles who don't have that special revelation have a general knowledge. And because of that, all man is without excuse. Jew or Gentile, whichever you are without excuse. Because from creation, this general knowledge about God and God's moral laws and right and wrong has been placed in every man, which leads us to no excuse. And what happens and why God abandons us is what we're going to look at, this abandonment wrath, and we're going to see. Because what man does is he rejects God, he suppresses the truth. We see in verse 21, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like something corruptible. So they began to worship the creature instead of the Creator. And therefore, God gave them up to all uncleanliness. And we see that in verse 24. And the lust of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than Creator, who was blessed forever. So, because of this, and we see this also in verse 28, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. This debased mind is not a correct mind, and and it goes on. Paul goes on to list all the different things of unrighteousness, wickedness, covetousness, malice, envy, murder, strife. He just goes on to list a ton of these just horrible sins, and they're just bad. But one of the big words in here in verse 30, backsliders, haters of God. I mean, haters of God. Does it get any worse than that? Violent, proud, boisterous, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. So you hear this big list of God abandons, and because they suppress the truth, just turns us over to all this wickedness and unrighteousness. And then knowing, verse 32, who knowing that the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. And that's where it's going to close in this chapter. And I think the important part of this chapter to really hold on to is just that, we look at God here, we have to look at his wrath as just, because God is love. God is also just, and he has to punish sin. And he can't grade it on a curve. He grades it pass or fail. That's what makes him God, and that's what makes him just, because it's the same punishment due for all. From the law's perspective, remember, it takes only one. And one, you're guilty. And they would get to this in later chapters, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God in Romans 3:23. But right now, we're just looking at the abandonment of God, his wrath, how that is revealed, what comes along with that. And then we're going to be moving into chapter 2, which is going to Paul's going to kind of make it a switch, because there's some very moralist people that are reading this and saying, ooh, and starting to point the finger and saying, hey, I don't live like that. And he's going to kind of spin it around and saying, that's incorrect also. So we're going to get into more of that next week. But I just want to encourage you to read this, because it's very important as we go through this doctrine, just to really dive into God's Word, see God's character, and how just he is, because we're saved by faith. Thank goodness, not of anything we do. We're deserving of death, but yet, because of his grace and mercy, by believing in him, we are saved. So I just want to encourage you to read this, follow along on this journey with us, and keep your eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith. Keep your eyes on the prize, Jesus Christ. Go have a good night. Thank you.